It's, even though there's just a question mark, I think it still works.
Okay, back to full screen.
So,
Okay. Can I start now? Are all our technical difficulties fixed? Yeah. I'm going to stay right here. Well, that was a rough start, but we're here. I am Max Ludwig. Welcome to the third presentation out of 10 for the 2014 security series of a topic from the Minimum Security Baseline Standard. And this one's on local security policies. I'm an analyst at ITS Security Operations and Services Office, and my co-presenter is Steve Dotz, the Director of Information Technology in Penn State's College of the Liberal Arts. Also with us in the physical audience are Ed Smiley and Jen Stewart of SOS's compliance team and co-leaders of the DataCat project, and Gary Gergerich, the manager of university's internal audit department's IT group, in case any questions from the wider audience are better answered by these folks than by Steve or me. So, let's see. We're going to begin with a quick review of the data categorization and the minimum security baseline standards at Penn State, the latter of which support the former. Data categorization is policy AD 71, and its purpose is to establish the categories of sensitivity that apply to data processed, stored, or transmitted within the university and its systems. AD 71 public data, which is the data you want the public to see. Think static web pages of content. Internal controlled data is the data we would like to keep within Penn State. There might be some liability if that data is lost, but there is no regulatory or compliance issue associated with it. And then restricted data, the crown jewels, which are those which the university has legal, regulatory, policy, or contractual obligation to protect. Access to restricted data must be strictly and individually controlled and logged. Typically, this data, if lost, would be considered reportable by law or government regulation. Social security numbers associated with a last name is an example you've heard of. At times, internal controlled and restricted data are combined and are going to be referred to as non-public data. ADG 07 is a guideline written to accompany policy AD 71 and contains all kinds of examples of all sorts of data and where they will fall in the three categories outlined in the policy, as well as points of contact within the university for questions about that data type. Formal adoption of AD 71 and ADG 07 was the first milestone of the data categorization project, a joint effort of the Security and Risk Management offices. The minimum security baseline adoption, just last month on April 22nd, is the second milestone. Originally known as the Security Standards Matrix, what has become the MSB has been in existence less formally for about 7 years and was used as a starting point in 2010 when Penn State cyber insurance criteria for the lower deductible were established in the event of a large PII data breach and subsequent notification with a large money cost to implement. Hello. Are we good? Okay. All right. The MSB is part of the revised guideline ADG 02, whose purpose is to establish minimum criteria for the university to meet its requirement to protect the data which needs to be protected. And that's what happened. We back a slide. There you go. All right. So Category 9 addresses the following 5 specific points required to be covered by local security policy. Now this is the point where we were going to put up that first poll. Is it over and done with? Do we have some results for Mm-hmm. The one that asks, have you looked over and begun considering the minimum security baseline? And we threw that up while we were having our audio problems, and A couple dozen people answered it already. Yes. There you go. So it looks like the largest category is, we have read the minimum security baseline and have a plan for the summer to assess our environment and begin compliance. Alrighty. Okay, the next two slides are screenshots from the Penn State Wikispaces publication of the minimum security baseline as it has been formally adopted. The screenshots of the document are here to show the public and the non-public columns and whether or not each point applies to just public, non-public, or to both. You see in the first 2 points of Category 9 that the requirement applies to both general data types. In some places within the MSB, you may see a pound sign rather than an X, which means that the item is currently optional, and in some cases may become a requirement in the future. If there is nothing in that space, then it is not a requirement. So let's see, moving along to the other 3 points of Category 9, you see that the contract statement in coordination with risk management is not a requirement for the public data category. Should I be back in full screen here? Yeah. Okay, so let's go through each of the 5 points of Category 9. The unit level policy addressing data protection and backup. Most of you already back up all of the data on your servers by one of several means. Is this written down anywhere? Is this formal local policy already? Are all of your users aware? And if backup of endpoints is not a service you offer, is that explicitly stated? And if the method and frequency of data backup already is somewhere in your documentation, has the testing of restoration already been addressed? 9.1.2, unit level policy on change control and configuration management. For this point, documentation needs to be in place regarding who accesses, how, where, and the applications involved concerning data use and storage. And when any changes are made to that, what roles are responsible for approving the changes. Policy 8020 is a university-wide acceptable use policy. 8020 does not address data, but does have sections about responsibilities of the Security Operations and Services Director, deans and administrative officers, system administrators, and system users. A local acceptable use policy details the responsibility of the end users and their actions with the systems that they have been issued for their work, the data they work with, and the responsibilities with the technology they use for their work. This can include references to password strength and safeguarding, workstation security, software licensing, and use of departmental file servers. This would also be where personal use of technology is addressed, if you allow that. Be specific. Unacceptable use and activity should also be specifically addressed in an acceptable use policy, as well as enforcement for non-compliance. This is where your unit will address your LANs and VLANs and device access to those, firewall rules, remote access, your Active Directory environment. Logging and auditing of network use could also be addressed here as well, and there will be more specifics to come about all logging and auditing at the Security Series topic on MSB Category 4 next month. Jen, does your microphone work? Jen Stewart is much more familiar with this point with her background after a few years in risk management.
This is awkward. Can you hear me coming through? Okay, so this applies, the contract statement applies if you're not using a central software that's already site licensed. So if you have a software that you're looking at purchasing, or if you're looking at hosting data offsite of Penn State, this would apply to you. So it's just making sure that we have the appropriate contract language in place that would cover legislatively controlled data such as FERPA, HIPAA, payment card industry data, as well as insurance language. And a lot of times we receive this information, it's coming through procurement services or risk management. They'll pass the contracts through us to make sure that we do a security review, as well as making sure the appropriate language is in place. Now, it's important to note also that not all the time will that vendor comply with everything that we want them to comply with. So we may need to negotiate on some of those terms, and it's really about making those risk-based decisions. So it's something that if you know that you're going to purchase software early on, get us involved sooner the better, rather than wait until you have that contract in place and you're ready to sign. That way we can be involved in the process to make sure that the infrastructure is meeting what our expectations are, as well as the appropriate language. Any questions on that particular part? Yeah, anything that's covered at a central level would be. So the question was if it's the appropriate language is making it into the Net Plus contracts. And the answer is yes. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Any questions from online? Good. Thank you, Jen. And by the way, all the points we just covered are auditable by the university's IT audit department next time they come through. They have a 5 to 6 year cycle, I've been told. Now we're going to have a look at what some of the IT departments around Penn State already have in place. This is a screenshot of the College of Engineering's Computing Policies page, which is available on the public internet. But don't strain your eyes trying to read this. The next slide will show the same list in a more readable manner. We just wanted to link to the page now for some of you, as you may want to go here right away. You can read that URL at the top. It ends in HTML, not 8. And I wanted to point out its layout and distribution. There's the introductory information surrounding this list. Each file is available in both HTML and PDF format. And each policy has a policy number, though it's a College of Engineering policy number. There's going to be more on policy numbering in a little bit. And you can't see it at the bottom of this page, but there is a mail to link to computing policy at engr.psu.edu for the users to ask questions and provide suggestions. So here's a list of the same 19 documents from the previous slide that should be more readable. We have added the page length of each document, and we have also added the date each was last updated as of 2 months ago when I put this together. And as you can see, the last updated dates range from 2003 to late 2010. So this should give, is there a question? Lastly, reboot. Okay. So this page should give you all a good idea about the various topics which can be addressed in local policy documents. And the College of Engineering has gone beyond the minimum requirements of the MSB, as local policy documents should. This collection contains more than highest level policies. It also contains lower level documents which support the higher level policies. That is, standards, procedures, and guidelines, which are less broad, but more specific to roles, and vendors, and technologies than policy should be. Among these shown here are their data classification policy. That's about 3/4 of the way down, which is a brief reiteration of AD 71. Acceptable use policy, the first one listed, satisfies MSB .9.1.3, addressing the users and their responsibilities. MSB .9.1.4, which is about unit level policy on network security, access control, and device configuration, are addressed by engineering with more than one document. One entitled Server Security Policy, the 7th one listed, addresses controls to data and the logging of that access on their servers, as well as addressing server configurations in one section of the document entitled General Configuration Guidelines. This also covers the MSB change control requirement as it applies to servers and the data stored there. Going down one on the list, the standard firewall rules policy, it is actually a standard, which is lower than a policy, so it has more specifics about the technology in it. This standard states what traffic will be allowed by port and service. The standard is accompanied by the firewall rules exceptions policy, the one listed right after it, which in fact is a procedure and has more specifics to the College of Engineering in it. Engineering's remote access policy and their virtual private network policy also satisfy the network security and controls. And the college computer server backup policy addresses backing up data at the college servers, satisfying the MSB's backup requirement at the college level. The College of Engineering also runs its own wireless, as well as offering the central PSU wireless service. The last document listed in this is the procedure for guest access to college wireless network. And this is a two-pager, which is a combination procedure and a printable form to initiate the procedure. I had a conversation a couple months ago with Jerry Chuckus, the IT director at the college, about the history of the policy process there. He told me that they have had Keep going. He told me that they have had an academic computing committee all of these years, consisting of only faculty members who review each of these documents as they are created or modified. IT writes the policies and the academic computing committee reviews and comments. There may be minor revisions after that, and then the policies are officially in effect and published. IT knows what the faculty need to do their business while keeping them as secure as possible and complying with the university policies. The faculty have approved. Communication is two-way. Lastly, the screenshot and the document analysis here was from late March of this year. I wanted to illustrate the technology and data topics covered by engineering. I can't tell you that if in that time that there have been any revisions or additions to this set. Moving along to Penn State Berks, who publishes their IT policy and procedure documents on their intranet. SOS and the university's internal IT audit group were there last year, and I have here a listing of their document titles and page links. The system security and use policy and the computer system use and network access agreement are the equivalent of an acceptable use policy and the user form to be signed. The latter contains standard language about responsibilities and mentions university-level policies, including but not limited to 8020, 8053, ADG01, and ADG02, and at the end of the form is where the user signs. The system security and use policy is more extensive and outlines roles and responsibilities of the Chief Information Officer, the User Services Manager, and the Network Security Officer within their IT department. It also contains procedures for requesting exceptions by faculty and staff, language about sanctions for non-compliance, and guidelines for users for reporting any breach of information or network security or compromise of computer and network security safeguards. So it's a bit of an instruction section. And now, Steve Dotz is going to speak about local IT policy and the College of the Liberal Arts.
Does that work? Yeah? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Just a brief overview. I'm going to share with you the history of liberal arts and what we did to go through policies, to create policies. Then I'm going to go over the anatomy of our policies and how you can get started with suggestions, distribution, and when to update your policies. Oh, there you go. Thanks. Let's start by stating the obvious. Writing policies is not fun. But they are now required. So hopefully we can help out today. One of the biggest benefits of security policies is when somebody asks to do something and you say no, they say why. And so in order to avoid being the bad guy, you can have your security policies will be a reference that you can point everybody to. So let's start with a brief history of liberal arts. So back in 2008, liberal arts had a few units that used social security numbers in what they did, and it was a business need, so we had to do it. So I think in 2008, the security office with auditing and risk came together, and I think it was 2008 started what was called AD-19 exception. It basically said if you use social security numbers and you have to use them, you basically have to be, this tall to get on the ride, basically defining the requirements that you have for that particular unit to be able to use social security numbers. Anyhow, one of the requirements was local security policies that we had to define. And so how did we get started? So as I'm sure, it's difficult to think about the magnitude of security policies because there's a lot to it. But starting small, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, so we went out, Googled security policies, found a corporate policy online that we downloaded in a Word version, and basically started from there because we found one policy that matched the requirements of AD-19. So we used that and basically made it our own. Within that policy, basically we found or looked for areas that we already knew. For example, backups. We already had a policy, we already knew what our backups were, so we started there, and that was, that's the best place to start, what you know. So let's talk about a little bit of the anatomy of the policy. So you'll notice we have a single security policy manual. It's a single document. That single document has a single scope and a purpose for just the entire document itself. It has a table of contents, the scope, roles and responsibilities, policies that are laid out, and again, a single document. It ends with exceptions and exemptions. So, as Madge said earlier, College of Engineering and Berks, they have policies where they have a single document for each of their policies, and each of that single document is actually defining a scope and a purpose. And the auditing office, or Gary's office, actually allows both versions, so you don't have to have a single policy, or I'm sorry, a single document for every policy. You can have a single document for all policies, as we do. So, Jen, can you switch over to the actual policy, and we'll go over. While we're doing that, can you? Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is the. I'm just going to briefly go through this policy, just so you have a sense of what it looks like. Certainly not going to go through 18 policies. So the owners, the authorized users, a disclaimer here. This is for confidentiality. Table of contents, and yes, this is a 53-page document, so the table of contents is about 6 or 7 pages. And like I said, we have 18 policies, and if you go to the end of the document, this is exceptions and exemptions. We all have, if you say you don't give admin rights, there's always an exception in your unit that you give. So this basically allows for, exceptions and exemptions. So if you, this is for the Adobe readers. Can we switch back to the? Yeah. Thanks. So where can you get started? I would suggest starting by borrowing somebody else's policy. And if you're on Adobe Connect, you can see in the lower left-hand corner, I've actually shared the Word version of all of our policies. So everybody has a template. If you don't have anything, that's a good place to start. You can download that Word document and actually just make sure that you make it your own. You certainly don't want to publish it and it says liberal arts in there if you're engineering. So, but that's a suggestion of where to start. Definitely borrow somebody else's policy and make it your own. That way you don't have to start from scratch. You could also, if you did want to start from scratch, you could just start by writing a brief paragraph about each of the 4 main unit level local policy requirements. What to start with? You could look at documentation that you have. That's the best place to go so you don't have to reinvent this information. When you look at your documentation, typically you can break it down into policy or guidelines. Policies are typically, you don't have named individuals or named software, named hardware. Guidelines, sometimes there's named people, sometimes there's named software, named hardware. You can also do what you already, whenever you write policies, just take what you already have. And for example, if you have username and passwords for OS logins, or you have file permissions, you already do that. You already have that documented somewhere, I assume, or at least one of your IT staff might already know what they do. Just have them document it. That will cover the access control part of the local policy requirement. Again, you could ask your technical staff, how do they go through change? Have them document it, and then convert that into a change management. For example, whenever they make changes, they know the process that they do. Just have them document it, and then you can formalize it into writing policies. Some suggestions: the acceptable use policy. So when I tackled this particular section, I wrote it and then took it to the HR department, and they said, yeah, no, you can't say that. Yeah, no, you can't say that. So basically, I had to include the human resource rep whenever I wrote it, and they actually ended up helping me write more than half of it because of the type of language that I had to include in the acceptable use section. Again, don't make it complicated. Keep it simple. If you write some things, ask for feedback. IT auditing, the security office, risk management, they'll be glad to give you feedback on either what you're missing or some suggested areas that you could work on. We did that several times as we went through all of our policies. Policies cannot be less restrictive, but they can be more restrictive than AD 20. So for example, admin rights. You could have very strict policies in your organization where they have to go through a training module and have a test, and they have to pass a test in order for them to get admin rights. That's obviously more restrictive than what AD 20 talks about. Distribution. Before you distribute the policy that you have to make sure you get leadership approval. You cannot enforce policies without executive or leadership approval and have them review it and make sure that they approve it, because they are the ones that if somebody disagrees with something, then you have to enforce the policies that are there, and it'll probably go up the food chain and somebody else will have to put the hammer down, so the policy is the hammer. So a little known fact is that when you publicize or any publication like a policy manual, there's actually a formal process at Penn State that you have to go through in order to publish that document. And that's done by the Office of Strategic Communications, which is formerly Public Relations. And every admin area has a designated representative. And at the end of our document, we have a list of resources and URLs on you can find your local representative. But anyhow, you take your policy, you submit it to this person, and they basically go through and review it, and they actually assign your publication a number. So this is an example of the statement that they will give you at the end of your policy to say that you have to, this is what you have to include, and at the end of this statement you can see that there's a number there, and that's the official number publication, the official number for that document. So if you change the document or make changes in the document, you have to resubmit for a new number. So these are little known facts that it came to, that I found out about later on, and found out we had to do that. So another part of distribution is, what is your campaign to get the word out? So you can go public, you can publish your documents either publicly or on an intranet. And you saw that engineering has their policies published publicly, and however Berks and liberal arts publish their policies on their intranet. And so for us, it's a risk thing where we have a lot of detail in our policies, and we didn't want social engineering to be a part of anybody out there that's looking to do anything bad. So we're just keeping it on our intranet. But you can evaluate your risk on publicly distributing your policies. A few other things: make sure that you communicate in your policies annually. Every year we all get new staff, new faculty, new grad students. Well, if you've only ever said it one time, then chances are they probably don't even know that you have policies that exist. So repeat those annually, and contact your department heads, see if you can get in some faculty, staff, or graduate student meetings. The other thing about your policies and distributing them, they really don't have any awareness effect unless the user has to physically sign off on those policies to basically say, yes, I agree to do that. So we have user agreement forms that we've established for PII and for the overall policy together. Is it possible you could bring up another document there? I think it was a PII in the drop-down list. Do you want me to do that? Yeah, so this is our PII. Full screen? Nope. This is our PII user agreement. It basically refers to our PII policy in our document, and just says, it talks about that they can't have PII, and that they will be responsible for remediating that PII and scan and review those results of the PII, which is in our policy. Again, we shared that, so you're welcome to read through the policy. You want to switch back while we publish the question? We're going to publish another question. What is the question? I forget. So, question: do you already have local security policies? Yeah. Raise your hands if you have local security policies. There you go. Sort of. Seems to be the... So I want to share one more document with you that was very helpful for our users. And that was a frequently asked questions. You know, like, for example, why all of a sudden are we asked to sign a user agreement? We got that a lot. So because our policy is so long, how can anyone seriously sign it without clear training or explanation of all the... So there's available training out on Angel for all of the security, if anybody needs any security training. So this is just an example of an FAQ that was helpful. Again, I'll be glad to share this with anybody if they want to take a look at it. So let's go back and switch. Yeah, yep, sorry. So when you do finally have local security policies, you need to review those and review them on a regular basis, typically at least annually, or when you have major changes or new IT initiatives, or whenever you have organizational change. It's also a good idea to have an administrative area or a section in your policy, typically at the beginning or the end, that defines roles and responsibilities on who's responsible to review that and how often are they responsible to review that. What did I learn about this process with Madge? So I learned that our policies are pretty outdated, even though I thought that they were, it's 53 pages and there's a lot of information there. They're outdated. So this summer we are definitely have to go through and edit and update those policies. So does anybody have any questions about anything that we covered specifically? Anybody online about the policy that you might have downloaded or looked at? No, we're good. Okay. Yeah. Oh, Ed? Smiley? Would you like to share the data categorization project?
Yeah, actually, first I had a question. How was your user base response? Like, how did they feel about seeing the policy and going through the acceptable use, form and signing off on?
Well, nobody liked the idea that they had to sign off on something. That was just a general, are you serious? I thought that being hired at Penn State, I just agreed to everything, and well, no, we have local security policies, and within liberal arts, it's something we do. And so after we explained what this was and that was added detail, they understood it. They didn't like it, but they understood it, and they signed it. And we did include, for the user agreements, we did include our HR office. So during orientation of new staff, the HR office actually has them sign it during their processing of the paperwork. So it's not like we show up at their door. Well, we did whenever we first wrote it, but so any new employee, it's just a part of the process. So you might want to consider that as an option. Yeah. A question behind you there, Ed?
My question is, how do you handle the annual signing of the policy? Because is it a paper process?
No, so we do not have them. We don't require annual signatures of a new policy. The assumption is that if we advertise and campaign that we made these changes, that acceptance, that original acceptance or that signature is good for as long as they're within liberal arts.
Okay, cool, thanks.
We have a question that came in through Adobe Connect. Is it a requirement, a policy, that each unit must have MSB policies with the official document numbers as LA has done?
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, or understand, you mean the number at the end of the policy that I talked about for publication? Was that the specific answer, or are they asking about, are the local policies actually required? Yeah, I think they're separate issues, but if you publicize a document, you need an official number, and each separate, I think, administrative area gets their own. I think ours is liberal arts is LBA. It starts with LBA. I would think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that probably comes out. I think that's even a separate publication policy that isn't necessarily
Yeah, it has
IT
nothing
or a security policy.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So to repeat what Ed said, the publication policy is a completely separate entity at Penn State than the security office. So the publication and the number at the end of your document that's required has nothing to do with the fact that the security office or auditing is asking you to create a document. It's just publications, period. It doesn't matter if you're talking about, your class schedules or courses, or if it's security policies, that publication, that review has to be done.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. Does a signature carry forward even if document number changes?
Yes, because we at least we don't reference that publication number in the agreement. We just reference the policy, the security policy manual.
All right. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the data categorization project, and really with the acceptance of the minimum security baseline, ADG02, it kind of completes the whole set for the data categorization project. Is that better, Jen? All right. For the data categorization project, as I mentioned, AD71 is the main policy. That's going to be phase 1. Phase 2 will be regarding the minimum security baseline around ADG02. We've been getting people who have been interested in looking at the minimum security baseline. Please contact us. The information is up on the screen. We can work with you on that. Typically, for other units, we're going to be taking phase 1, doing the categorization with the individuals first. But if you think you're ready and you have some interest, be sure to reach out to us and we'll get back to you about that. We're happy to work with you on that. For the minimum security baseline, the process will be similar to DataCat. It will have a modulo survey that you will, IT professionals will fill out for classes of systems. We wouldn't have a survey for each individual system. So if you have a set of desktops that you image the same way, one minimum security baseline could be filled out for all of those machines. Same with server class machines and things like that. So our website's up on the screen. We also have a contact email address, datacat@psu.edu. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thanks.
Can you hear me? Audio good? Any more questions from Adobe Land? Okay, one other thing I'd like to say about policy publication, the last two references in this resources slide, the whole slideshow will be available fairly soon. It's references ur.psu.edu. University Relations changed its name to Strategic Communications. They're the people that make the rules about policy publications or publications in general. And so look through that to get some more helpful information from them. So I believe that's the end of us, end of local security policy. The next offering will be earlier in the month, in June, in the 10th through 12th range. And again, it's covering minimum security baseline category 4 about logging and auditing. And thanks to everyone for attending. Thanks, Steve, for helping me out. Thanks, Gary, for being here, even though no one asked you any questions. Gary Gergers, that is. And have a good holiday weekend.